as well as available in our archived library. So, thank you again for joining us today for ARIA, What, Why, and When. Our speaker today is Phil Cragness. Phil has served as the Adaptive Technology Specialist and Manager of the Computer Accommodations Program at the University of Minnesota since October 1998. He received his Bachelor's of Arts in Cognitive Psychology from Carnegie Mellon University in 1987 and developed Carnegie Mellon's first disability services program, serving as its director while pursuing his degree. In 1995, Phil received his Master's of Science in Experimental Psychology from the University of New Mexico. We are delighted to have Phil with us as today's presenter. Thank you so much for doing this session, and I will turn things over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, greetings, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join me. And as Kevin mentioned today, we're not only going to be talking about ARIA code and looking at ARIA, but hearing how the JAWS screen reader interacts with that code. So know what actual accessibility benefits are being provided to the screen reader user. Now, for those who are not fully familiar with ARIA, it's an acronym, stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It's a suite developed by the Web Accessibility Initiative Working Group of the World Wide Web Consortium. And the current version is 1.1. Now, ARIA is intended to give information to non-visual users or screen reader users. It does not produce any visual change on the screen. So if you're a developer, you don't need to worry about it causing ill effects with your design. For administrators, supervisors, if your people come to you and say, well, yeah, we want to make it accessible, but we got this really neat design, we don't want to mess it up, then say, well, ARIA is not going to do that. It's simply information that the screen reader can get a hold of. And so the anatomy, is the way I like to think of it, of ARIA consists of three components. First is roles, and roles can label an object, tell the screen reader, well, this is a slider or this is X. It can also define chunks of text on a screen. So we could have a banner role, a navigation role, main role, and so on, that not only helps the non-visual user to understand how information relates to other information on the screen, but what type of information should be expected. The second part of the anatomy is the status. So in some cases, we want to know that I've clicked an object and that object is selected. As a visual user, it may take on an appearance change of some kind, but the screen reader can't. That's not part of the native HTML. So we need to provide some information about status of the control. And then the third component of the ARIA anatomy are properties. And so, for instance, we could have a property, and these are always in the format of ARIA dash and then property name. And we'll be looking at several today. As I show you different components, I'll try to identify whether they are a role, a property, or a status element. But the properties, again, are going to tell the screen reader something just popped up on the screen. Read this. Read it immediately, or be polite and wait till the screen reader's done reading what it was reading, then interrupt. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump into my page here. So I'm going to press the letter 1, which will take me to the level 1 heading on the page.
ARIA :1, when heading level 1.
And that, of course, gives us the title of the page. I'm not going to sit here and let JAWS do my presentation, so I'm sure reading the paragraph below that can be handled without JAWS doing the honors. So I'm going to press Tab to move into our tab controls. And I want you to listen carefully to what the screen reader reports when I land on the first tab.
Roll tab selected. Use JAWS key plus Alt plus M to move the controlled element.
So we have a roll. This is a roll tab, ironically, but we have a roll that says tab. Roll equals tab. So the screen reader reports this as a tab. You notice it said selected. So we now know what the state is. I said status earlier. On the handout, I guess I used the term state. So what state is this control in? It's selected. And it gave us some information about using certain key combinations with JAWS to move to the associated content. And this is a property, what we call it ARIA-controls. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move to the next heading by pressing the letter H.
Roll heading level 3.
And roll. It will describe those. These first are landmark.
Region landmarks heading level 4.
Which JAWS is going to now tell us.
Land. Note columns of HT3 columns and 10 rows. Column 1.
I can move into the table, so I have roll.
Link collects application. Row 2.
Now, do we have that on the screen, Kevin?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. So this is a table that shows the most common of the ARIA landmark regions. Now, if you'll notice...
Description. A region that functions as a web application associated elements. List of 2 items, bullet div, bullet section, list ends, column 3.
We get some of the HTML tags that we can use with this particular role. So again,
link collects application.
Now, application is the one role that actually causes the screen reader to go into, you might guess, application mode. And so when a screen reader is reading down the screen and encounters controls, whether they be radio buttons, checkboxes, edit fields, etc., it will just read past them. In order to interact with them, I have to stop and hit enter to go into forms mode. If I tab to the control like an edit field, it will automatically go into forms field. Well, when you're creating a little widget on the screen, you may need to force the screen reader to interact with the controls, and you can do that with an ARIA role equals application. The other roles, such as banner, let's see what we have.
Link collects article, row 3.
Articles.
Link collects banner, row 4.
Banner. I'll let you read down the list. These simply allow the screen reader to report these blocks or areas that make up the web page. They also mirror some of the HTML5 tags. Thanks to the increased semantics of HTML5, the screen reader can report the equivalent. So if I put a header element, so less than sign, header greater than, the screen reader will recognize that as a banner region. But I could also make it a div. I could do less than div and put in the attribute role equals banner. And the screen reader will report both of those in the same way. Now you can also double up on the tags. So you could have a less than heading or header, role equals banner. So you can have both the ARIA role and the HTML element. That will not cause it to be read twice or cause any other ill happenings for the screen reader user. I don't know if the W3C has fixed that in their validation tool. It will point it out as a check, a redundancy check. but it will still validate the page. So those are region landmarks. Now,
For students, faculty, and staff heading level 3.
let's find.
Tracking to top.
Whoops.
ARIA colon 1. Tab all heading level 3.
Okay.
Region landmarks tab select. Element identification tab select.
So I'm in a second set of tabs here.
Element identification.
Now, this is a set of color sliders. And the way they are developed, for any developers, the code example, there's nothing in the HTML that identifies this to the screen reader as a slider. So we need to have role equals slider.
Example color sliders red 100,100 green 1. Example. Example color sliders red 100,100 green 1.
Okay.
Red left right slider 100.
And it's telling me left right. So that's another, actually a property value that can be added to the slider to let the user know whether they should be using the left and right arrow keys or the up and down arrow keys.
101, 102, 103.
So I could change these.
101. Example color sliders red 100 green left right slider 100 100 199 89.
I'm probably going to come up with some hideous color example.
Example color 0 blue left right slider 0. Example color sliders red 101 blank.
Okay, and I
Black on black.
so
As virtual blank resulting background color blank resulting background gray 20 on orange 4.
orange 4. Okay, so I have a key combination on the screen reader, which is insert and 5 on the number row that will actually report the colors to me.
Gray 20 on orange 4. 051051051 on 10108900.
And then I get the decimal value that I've just selected. So those are the two main functions of roles: to identify regions, areas of the page, and to identify elements, custom elements that have been created using HTML where the HTML does not convey the actual meaning or purpose of that function. So are there any questions on ARIA roles?
We don't have any questions in the chat at this point. I'll give folks... We are getting a little bit of echo. So I'll give folks a quick chance to type. I think we're good, Phil.
All right. Well, gee, that means I must actually be making sense.
ARIA colon 1.
Okay.
Role tab select.
So now I'm on roll. Well, with tab, actual file folder looking type tabs, I can't tab to the next one. Once I'm on a selected tab, I use the arrow keys. So I'm going to right arrow once.
ARIA dash label tab selected. Use JAWS key plus Alt plus M to move the controlled element.
Okay, so we now know that ARIA dash label, that tab is selected.
ARIA dash label.
Okay, so what does the ARIA label do? Well, ARIA label, which is ARIA dash label equals, and then whatever text label you wish, is a way to provide a label for the element where there's not a defined label on the screen, whether it be an image with an alt tag or a text label or something of that nature. There will be cases. We can also use ARIA label to identify different landmark regions. So the W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WebCAG, states that whenever we have more than one role of a given type on a page, there must be some way to distinguish them from one another. So let's say I have a page with a navigation region. I've given it either a less nav tag or a less div role equals navigation. And I have two of those. The first one may be being the primary site navigation and the other content navigation. So what I can do is label those. Less nav aria dash label equals primary. What I always warn people about is not to use the name of the element in the label. So for instance, if I have a navigation element, a less nav element, and I put aria dash label equals primary navigation as my attribute, the screen reader will report primary navigation region. So we'll get that repeated twice. So don't use the name of the element in the label. So it's just aria dash label equals primary, and that will be read as primary navigation region.
Element label tab selected. Use JAWS key. Element label. Example search. Blank. Example. Blank. Search. Edit.
Okay, so
search edit.
So when I tab to this edit field, it says search, but as often the case, they don't have any text that actually functions as a label saying search. And so I want to say to people with screen readers, yes, you are in a search element. I do that by creating my input element of type text and including the aria dash label equals search.
Search button. One-stop list. Example search U of M web.
Okay.
For students, faculty, and staff heading level 3. Wrapping to top. R wrapping to bottom. Element label heading level 4.
It seems like it's telling me I'm in a different view than I should be.
For students, faculty, and element label heading level.
Okay.
Region landmark differentiation tab. Use JAWS key plus alt. Element label tab. Region landmark differentiation tab.
So region landmark differentiation. This is what I was just speaking
Region
about.
landmark differentiation.
So I'm going to hit the letter R on my keyboard for region.
Site navigation region.
Site navigation region.
Blank. Example. Blank. Site navigation region. List of 6 items. Link home. Link section 1. Link section 3. Link section 4. Link section list end. Site navigation region end.
Tells me when that region ends.
Section navigation region.
And now I'm in section navigation region.
List of 6. Link page 1. Link page 2. Link page 3.
So this helps to let the user know what type of elements and what those elements might take them to. Now there's a way in JAWS, I don't know that the font size will show up well on the screen, but I can create a list of regions.
Document regions dialog. Regions preview. Section navigation 2 of 2. 2. Site navigation 1 of 2.
And if I want to go to site navigation, I can just jump right to that.
Site navigation region. List of 6 items.
And there will be my elements again. Okay, so any questions on the use of the ARIA label for identifying elements or for distinguishing among landmark regions?
I do see it. We have one person typing, but I also want to remind folks if you're over the phone, we'll give you a couple seconds to hit #6 or #6 to unmute your lines. I'll be able to see that happen, and I'll be sure to give you a cue to ask your question. So go ahead and do that now. We'll just give Bo a couple of seconds to finish typing here. All right, so a question from Bo. When do you use role, article, or region?
Role, article, or region. Okay. A role will, when you're creating sections of your page, the role element will cause those to be spoken as regions. So if I move...
Heading level 4 region landmark differentiation, complementary main region.
So there's main region. That's using a less main tag. I don't think it has an ARIA attribute on it. So article, if we have, let's say, a main section, whether we've created that using HTML5, the ARIA, the role attribute, or combination, within that we may have, so we may have some information, and then the information refers to a specific block of text that we'll call an article. The article can also have sub-reference context, which would be complementary, or in HTML5 tags, an aside tag. So it breaks the sections down into more meaningful blocks. So I could say, let's say I have an article about ARIA, and I say what ARIA is, and then I want to include a brief article that someone has written about the topic, and I put that inside an article attribute, and maybe I label it. So I give it ARIA label, ARIA, its pros and cons, and so that's read as ARIA pros and cons article region. That's how that will be spoken. So I hope that's clear, that article is just another way to break down a page into more meaningful chunks. But regardless of which role you use, or HTML5 equivalent of that role, the screen reader will always report it as a region.
Okay, Bo is typing again, but we do have another question from Corey in the meantime. Corey asks, no questions on ARIA labels, but when is the best time to use labeled by versus described by?
Okay. We're going to get into labeled by and described by briefly and or shortly, and you'll see that it determines when the information is read. So a label is going to speak the information prior to the control. The description is going to follow the control. So that's a basic, very basic difference. And again, the words themselves, label and describe by, or description. So I could have a label that says insurance checkbox, and then description, check here to, show you recognize you picked your primary clinic or whatever. And we'll see more of that in just a minute as we get to those pages or those tabs.
Okay, and we just have one.
Another question?
We have one follow-up question from Bo, so we'll handle that, and then I think just in the interest of time, we should move on after Bo's follow-up. So Bo asks, that makes sense. The following question is not ARIA, but when to use the HTML5 element section and when to use article element.
That probably gets more into a design topic than accessibility. When the screen reader hits article, it will say article region. When it hits section, it doesn't say anything. The section screen reader treats that just like a div element. So unless you put an ARIA, a role attribute on it, the section element will not be identified by the screen reader, where the article element will be reported as a landmark region. Okay? We'll jump.
No prior headings at level 1. Virtual P. No prior heading. ARIA : what? Role tab use JAWS. ARIA dash label tab selected. ARIA dash labilete tab.
So labilete. You gotta love the way the screen reader pronounces some of these things. You'll notice there are two L's, Labelled. For those of you residing in the U.S. and probably Canada, you're going, there's only supposed to be one L in there. But the W3C is, well, the first W, worldwide, first two W's. And so they have input from all over the world. They settled on the European writing of that element name. So when you use it, make sure you get that second L in there.
ARIA dash labilete.
Okay, so why is there a label and a labeled by? Well, the label, again, just you put in text and that becomes the label. So as we saw with a search field, we didn't have a on-screen, a visible label for that edit field. I mean, other than the button after it said search. So we need to identify it to the screen reader with the label. Now, if there are visible labels, text labels, or images with appropriate alt text, you can reference those by ID. And that's what the labeled for attribute does. It's also nice because you can take different parts of the screen or different sections or blocks of text or images and combine them. That is, you can have multiple IDs in your ARIA labeled by element. So I can have ARIA labeled by equals ID 1, ID 2, ID 3, and so on. And we'll see that in just a second.
Element label based on position in the sequence.
Okay, so label based on its position in the sequence.
Example, delete entries after.
Okay, so.
Example, delete entries after days, weeks, months, edit. Edit.
Okay, so I want to put, let's say, 10.
Delete entries after days, weeks, months, edit. 10. Type in text. Delete entries after combo box, days, 1 of 3. Weeks.
So let's choose week. So I put 10 in the edit field. I've just selected weeks.
Table referencing the ID for a container.
Whoops.
Example, delete virtual P. Delete entries after combo box, weeks. Blank code. Delete entries after combo box, weeks.
Of course, it's not going to read it.
Delete entries after combo box, weeks, 2 of 3.
Yeah, it should have said 10 weeks. Something went a little screwy.
Delete entries after days, weeks, months, edit. 10.
Okay, so 10 months, week. Yeah, I think I messed something up in my code. But what's nice is I can tell this when I move to this first edit field, I can have it read delete entries after and edit. When I move to the next field, I could say, okay, read.
Delete entries after combo box, weeks, 2 of 3.
So, see here it's reading delete entries after, and it's saying weeks. Now it should have said delete entries after 10 weeks. I must have left an ID out that referenced that previous edit field. But that way you can take, again, different blocks, chunks of text. It can be text on the screen, images with alt text, or text within an edit field. So I could give that an edit field an ID and reference it. I can also change the order, do a lot of different things with the label by element.
Label referencing the ID for a container.
I can also reference the ID for a container. So I'm going to move.
Example warranty term warranty link.
So I have a warranty link.
Terms and conditions link.
Terms and conditions.
Privacy statement link.
Privacy statement link.
Example, I agree to the above conditions. I agree to the above conditions. Checkbox not checked.
Yeah, it's not. I wonder if I did this in Firefox, I bet it would read. And that is always one problem. Some browsers will read ARIA information better than others. This should have said, I agree to the above information. It would list the links in the container.
Agree to the above conditions. Checkbox not checked.
Yeah. Must be IE is playing games. But normally I could have it confirmed so they wouldn't, the person, non-visual person, when they get to that checkbox, it would remind them, okay, the information above, and here's what it happened to be. You know, as a visual user, you could look at the checkbox and glance above it and know right away that that information's there.
Stop link. Example, privacy state terms and warranty. Example, warranty label referencing the ID for a container. Example, delete entry. Example, delete entries at element label based on position in the sequence. ARIA-labyrinth. ARIA-labyrinth tab.
Okay, so any questions about the ARIA-labeled by?
So we've got 2 questions already from Corey. Is there a limit to the number of IDs labeled by and described by accepts?
I haven't seen any statement from the W3C, but I find that after 4, it doesn't speak the remainder, so I would use 4 as a good practice. If you're getting beyond 4, the label, it may be getting a little complex as it is. Although I can understand, I think the point you're trying to make is if you had a form where you wanted to have a progressive labeling, it could get a little involved. But if you can try to stay to 4 or less, I think you're safe. Described by may accept a few more than that, but I said I've never exceeded, well, when I have exceeded 4, I find that the 5th one and beyond usually is not spoken. Okay, second
and then a follow-up question from Corey. And must the IDs be separated by commas, or are spaces sufficient?
Yeah, just spaces, no commas. Yeah, no commas in the listing of IDs for labeled by and described by.
Virtual.
I do see Bo is typing. I think in the interest of time, we should probably move on, and we can come back to Bo's question or comment in the next pause.
Alrighty.
ARIA colon. Roll tab. ARIA-labyrinth. ARIA-describent tab.
So I can't even pronounce it the way the screen reader does.
ARIA-des.
So the described by can be used in several ways, and it's to provide, oftentimes you'll find an element, whether it be a checkbox or perhaps an edit field that has an expanded description of what goes in that field. And if we don't programmatically associate that information with the element, the screen reader user may be completely unaware of its existence, and filling in the field or knowing whether they should check the checkbox or not may be confusing or produce tension, etc. Now, there are some cases where there isn't a visible description, but we want to make information more salient, clear, more understandable, comprehensible to the user, we can actually put a block of text inside a div element and give it a hidden attribute and an ID. We'll need an ID on it to reference by the ARIA described by. And even though that element is hidden from the screen reader and the visual user, that is, visual user won't see it, and if a screen reader tries to arrow over it, there's nothing there. It is hidden. However, they tab to the edit field with the ARIA described by attribute that references that, and the content of that hidden element will be spoken by the screen reader. So it's a little trick for giving some additional information when a control may not be clear.
Element description using multiple ID references.
Okay, so I'm going to, this is using multiple ID. If this doesn't work, I'm going to switch over to Firefox.
Example, Marvin the Martian, the Looney Tunes cartoon character. Marvin the Martian made his debut in 1948. Marvin's voice was performed by, example, Marvin the Martian, the Looney Tunes cartoon character. Marvin the Martian made his debut in 1948. Marvin's voice, listen to an audio sample button.
Okay, so, yeah,
listen to an audio sample button. Marvin the Martian voice performed by Mel Blanc.
Okay, so audio, there we go.
Listen to an audio sample button.
Come on,
listen to an audio sample button. Element, example, Marvin the Martian. Listen to an audio sample button. Marvin the Martian voice performed by Mel Blanc.
Why it's not reading automatically when I'm tapping to it? It's an IE thing, I think. But this way, as I'm tapping through a page, we often will get links like this. Listen to an audio example. It's like, well, an audio example of what? And so we have a button, and we could put a value on the button, which the screen reader would read as its label. We could use a label, although the visual user will need something as well. But then we attach an ARIA described by, and we simply put span tags around the different sections of text in our paragraph that we want to form a description, and then we reference those IDs in whatever order makes sense.
Listen to an audio sample button. Listen to an audio sample button.
Come on.
Screen update. Listen to an audio sample button. Marvin the Martian voice performed by Mel Blanc.
Yeah, it should be reading that automatically. And I this is a new computer for me, and it's still got a few quirks I'm discovering.
Element description using the container ID reference. Example, play. Warning: pressing this button will result in your ears being assaulted by complete non-dash sense. Caution: it may cause you to laugh out loud.
Okay, so this is that instance where I had text that the screen reader may not be aware of, screen reader user may not be aware of if they had simply tabbed to the control, which would be play an audio.
Blank. Space. Blank. Example, play. Warning: pressing this button will result in your ears being assaulted.
Okay, so it's just a play button.
Example, play button. Warning: pressing.
All it does. The audio.
Example, play. Warning: element description. Example, Marvin the Martian, the Looney Tunes part. Listen to an audio
I didn't play this.
Oh, drat these computers. They're so naughty and so complex.
Expresses my feeling about this new computer all too well.
Element example, play. Warning:
So this is a way to attach that information. So now, going back to Corey's question from earlier, we're taking we could have the ARIA label, and that would label the element, so it would read it prior to the element. So let's say we had the text search and we attach that with an ARIA labeled by, then we'd have search text edit, because we're in an edit field. But if we took some text, maybe there was text below, this will search site X, and we attach that with an ARIA described by, what we're going to get is search, which is the ARIA labeled by, the edit as it announces the type of field, and then this will search site X as the expanded description. So if you think of it that way, so label says, identifies the element, purpose, and then the description tells you what the element will do, or what it's going to search, or set certain limits, or expands information as to what that control will do.
One-stop link.
Okay.
Example.
So,
Element description using the contain Marvin the Martian element description using.
okay, so any questions on ARIA described by?
So we've got two questions right now. The first is from Bo and refers back to ARIA landmark roles. So maybe we'll save that one for the end when we can go back. But he does have a question about described by. So his question is, what is the difference between ARIA described by and ARIA labeled by? Can you give me an example which one is better to use?
Yeah, so that's what I was just saying. The label identifies the element. So if I have, again, the word search, and I put, an element, paragraph mark with an ID. So less P, ID equals search, less than search, less / P greater. So I've got the word search, and I've tagged an ID with it. So then I create my input element, just the input type equals text, so on, and I put ARIA-labeled by equals search, since that's the ID for that paragraph containing the word search. Below that, I may have another paragraph which I will call, so less than P, ID equals search what? Greater than this will search site X, less / P greater than. So in that input element, I have the ARIA-labeled equals search, and then I have ARIA described by equals search what, and that will read the description after. So a description, the ARIA described by is a description of what the element does or refers to, where search is a label, or ARIA labeled by is for associating the label. So labeled by, if you're familiar with the HTML label for element, it does the same thing as label for. So you can think of label for element and ARIA labeled by as equivalent. There is no equivalent for ARIA described by in HTML. Okay, so hopefully that clarifies.
Bo had one quick follow-up to that. So they are in a technical sense identical. I think you kind of just covered that. That would be a no.
Yeah. No, they read the information labeled by prior to the element, described by after the element. So I don't want to get to edit and then hear the description. I want to hear, when I hit the element, I want to hear label element, then description. So hopefully that clarifies it.
PC. ARIA full. Roll tab. ARIA dash describe. ARIA dash expanded tab selected. Use JAWS key.
Okay, so we've talked about labeled by and described by and label. So these are ARIA properties. Now we're going to look at an ARIA state or status, which is ARIA expanded.
ARIA-expanded.
And so oftentimes we'll get accordions on a page, and you mouse over or click on something and it drops down a set of related options. Well, if I don't put an ARIA expanded attribute on that, it will just read it as a normal link or control. And then I won't know that, oh, well, by clicking this link, it's not going to take me somewhere new. It's going to expand information. And I don't know what the state of the control is. By using ARIA expanded, and again, this is a state, so it's ARIA-expanded, it can be either true or false. So the initial state, when something is collapsed, the value is false. It's simple Boolean value. So think of it, you'll see ARIA-expanded equals. Well, if it's not expanded, then expanded must be false. When it becomes expanded, activated, and expanded, that Boolean value will need to be switched to true, and that is all done through scripting.
Structural identification of element state. Example: campuses toolbar. Campuses button collects use JAWS key plus Alt plus M to move the
Okay, so I have campuses button collapsed.
Campus community button collects use JAWS key plus Alt.
And I'm also getting some property information because I used ARIA controls. That's why it's giving the JAWS key information.
Helpful links button collects use JAWS key plus.
Okay, so I'm going to go up to this first button.
Campuses button.
And again, Kevin, these are visible on the screen?
Currently, you can see the campuses collapsed, campuses community collapsed, helpful links collapsed.
Great, thank you.
Campuses button collects use JAWS.
So I'm going to hit enter.
Expanded. Campuses button expanded use JAWS key plus Alt plus.
So it told me that it had expanded it. Now it identifies it as expanded.
Twin Cities link. Crookston link. Williams link. Morris link.
Okay, if I go back up to that control.
Twin Cities campuses, click the collects button, expanded use JAWS key plus Alt plus M to move the controlled element.
It not only tells me that that control is expanded, but that I can click to collapse.
Campuses, click the collects button, collects use JAWS key plus Alt plus M.
So now it's collapsed.
Campuses, click the collects button, collects. Campuses, click the collects button, collects use JAWS.
It says click to collapse. This is for some reason. I think there's something in the buffer, but
campuses, click to expand button, collects use.
There we go. Now it's switched. So click to expand.
Campus community button collects use JAWS key plus Alt plus M to move. Campus community button expanded use JAWS key plus Alt. My new link. One stop link. My new campus community, click the collects button, expanded use JAWS key. Campus community, click the collects button, collects use JAWS. Helpful link. Campus community, click to expand button, collects use JAWS key.
Okay, so it's giving us quite a bit of information about the state and what to do with the control. So this is how we deal with any state, ARIA state attribute. It needs to be ARIA dash and then the actual element. So in this case, expanded. On the tabs, I was using selected. So ARIA dash selected. And it's either true, and then the tab is reported as selected, or false, and then nothing is spoken. It doesn't say not selected. It just doesn't say anything about the state.
Helpful link. Campus community, click to campuses, click example campuses, click to structural identification, ARIA-expanded. ARIA-expanded tab selected, use JAWS.
So this says tab expanded. This is ARIA-expanded.
Navigation menu button. ARIA-expanded tab selected, use JAWS key plus up.
Okay, so any questions on ARIA states in general or ARIA expanded and Boolean values?
We don't have any questions on that so far. This is a reminder to those of you over the phone. If you hit #6 or #6, you'll go off of mute and be able to ask a question verbally. So I'll watch for that for a few seconds. But while we are paused, we did have a follow-up question from Jeanne on labeled by and described by, so maybe we can hop back to that quickly. Are there any other uses for labeled by or described by other than in forms?
Yeah, it's a good point. It has to be an active control. So, I mean, you can use them to distinguish different landmark regions. So earlier we talked about if I have multiple navigation regions, I can use ARIA label. So ARIA label equals primary and ARIA label equals section. Well, let's say there's a heading within a section. So I have an article tag, less than, article, greater than. Then I have a heading tag for that article, let's say less H2 greater than article on penguins, less / H2 greater than. I can give that H2 an ID. So I could say less H2 ID equals penguins. And then in that nav, when I create my article tag, I can have less article ARIA-labeled by equals penguins. And it will read the text contained by those level 2 heading tags. So you can use it other than forms. Described by is probably not something, I don't even know if it'll work, to be honest. I can't see describing a section if they're going to read the content anyway. It would be rather redundant. But I can create a list of regions on the page, and if there are several articles, it will tell me penguin article, walrus article, whatever I've attached using the label by. So again, label by lets you refer to an ID of an element that contains the text you want to use as the label, where ARIA label, you simply enter the text. Would that clarify?
We do have another question. I think so. We do have another question from Bo. If a link is selected in the main menu, do I use ARIA current or ARIA selected? Which one is better to use?
Yeah, I haven't played too much with the current. I'm not sure how well it's implemented. You could use ARIA selected. Trying to think what I do in this example. Let me jump up to my navigation region.
Virtual PC search. Same page link main wrapping to bottom navigation. Inclusive by the same page link main navigation banner. Same page link main cost search. Main region. Heading level 4 struck navigation region. Heading level 3 for students, faculty, list of 2, link 1 stop, link my news, link list, heading level 3
this is
for
acting like
context
it's in
menu bar, leaving menus for student, navigation region. Heading level 3 for students,
It's acting like it's in a mobile
List
view.
of link list and navigation region copyright 20. Inclusive by same page link main navigation. Same page link search. Edit. So navigation menu button.
Yeah, it is.
Navigation menu button. Navigation menu button. Navigation region. Link home. Visited link web accessibility. Visited link ARIA. HT ARIA link active.
So that says active, and I just associated that using an ARIA described by. So as I was saying earlier, I created a div on the page. I gave it the attribute hidden, so no one can see it. And I gave it an ID. And then all it says is active, and then I close the div. So whatever link I have active, I just either add or remove the ARIA dash described by attribute. And so that's how I handled it. You could use selected. That would make sense as well. So it's kind of, little bit of personal preference there. They'll all kind of convey the same idea that, hey, this is an active element or currently selected element.
Virtual PC.
Okay, any other questions?
We do have a couple more questions, but I also wanted to let you know we've hit the 1 hour mark. So we have roughly 25 minutes to go before we need to take final questions at the end. So timing-wise, do you want to take a few more now, or should we move on and then come back to those questions?
Yeah, I think I only have
HTML tools and ARIA-expanded. Structural identification, ARIA-expanded.
Hold on, let me figure.
Virtual ARIA : Role tab, ARIA-expanded, ARIA-required, role tab selected.
Yeah, I only have one more tab to cover, so I could take a couple more questions now.
Great. So we just had Bo's question. So we have two questions from Corey. The first is, do links need to have ARIA selected? If they are created using the anchor tag, they should already have the semantics needed.
Yeah, well, when you hit a link, the rule of thumb in design is a link takes you to another page. A button performs a function on the current page. But you are correct, Corey, in that a regular anchor tag will be reported as a link. There's no extra coding needed. Now, this relates to Bo's question, though. However, you may have a set of something that are acting kind of like tabs, but you can't arrow among them. And you've selected one that changes a portion of the screen. So the screen reader user needs to know which element is active. And that's when it would make sense to use ARIA current, ARIA selected, or ARIA described by using the hidden text technique I described just a minute ago. So, but links in general, no, you don't need any coding, any ARIA coding to say this is a link. Similarly, if you create a button, whether it's input type equals button or less button in HTML5, they will both be reported as buttons.
Okay, and then one additional question from Corey. Can we talk more about when is the best time to use ARIA?
Yeah, well, if I could hold that question to the end, I wanted to show you the last tab and last ARIA attribute I'm going to talk about, and then we'll talk about the when part of the presentation. So, just as in the order, the when kind of comes at the end. So if I can ask you to be patient a few more minutes.
And that's our last question for now, so I think we can move on.
Okay.
ARIA dash required tab select.
Okay, so ARIA required.
ARIA dash.
This, of course, pertains to form elements. And often we'll have form elements that require input identified in a visual means. So it may be the text of the label is in red, or the border around the edit field is red, or color alone is used as some kind of indicator. And this violates WCAG standards. Using color alone, non-visual users, those who are completely blind, will not be able to access that information. Those who may be colorblind may be unaware of certain colors that may be used. And for someone with red-green color blindness, red's no different than black. So color alone, that doesn't mean you can't use color. It's the alone part of that statement that's important. We need to identify it to the screen reader. The other alternative to color that people use may be a symbol or a word. So they may use the word required, or they may use an asterisk. Well, those are great if they're included properly. So in HTML, we have a label for element that we can use to associate a label with a field. And it's just less than label for equals, and you give it a unique ID. The text you want to use for the label, /label greater than, and then you put that ID in the input element. Well, often what will happen is people will place the asterisk or the word required outside that label element. So when the screen reader gets to an edit field, all the person hears is the label, say first name, and edit, even though there's an asterisk or the word required there. It just wasn't included properly to be read. Well, there's an even easier way to do it. And what's also nice about the technique I'm going to show you, because it does use a ARIA property value that is a Boolean value, certain fields may be required depending on your previous responses, or may not be required based on those previous inputs. And so it can be changed easily using this technique. So
required field indication. Example name colon edit required.
Okay, so like a described by tag, it reads the property required or not after the element. So you heard name colon edit required. Well,
Virtual PC graphic required.
but see, there's a little graphic there.
Name colon.
There's name colon,
Graphic required.
a little graphic that says required, but that's outside the label for element.
Name colon edit. Name colon edit required.
But this way, it doesn't matter. So we have a visual representation. Visual users, no problem. They see the little icon. For screen reader users, we've identified the field as required simply by using ARIA-required equals true.
Email colon edit required. Submit button. One stop link. Exact email colon edit required.
Okay, so both those fields have the required attribute. And what's nice, you can create styles in your style sheet based on this. And that way, if you change the Boolean value, ARIA-required equals false, so it's not a required field, you can remove any styling. Or if it's true, then you can add styling. So I could have a left square bracket, ARIA dash required equals true, right square bracket, a left brace, and then say border colon solid red 2 pixels. And so that way you don't have to put a class or anything else on those elements. You just put in the ARIA required true or false. If the status of that attribute changes, the styling of that element changes. And so this is a really good way to build in accessibility and have it control the visual presentation. At the beginning, I said ARIA does not affect visual presentation. Well, no, in itself it does not, but we can base our cascading style sheet definitions on ARIA attributes. So if I have ARIA-selected equals true, I want my element to have increase my font size by 1, make the font bold, do whatever. You probably see that when I was navigating the tabs. So there's a visual indication that which tab is selected, and all I'm doing is changing the ARIA selected attribute and applying a style based on its state. So that's the beauty of using elements of this nature, is being able to control both the accessibility of the element and the visual styling of the element simultaneously. So is that clear to everyone? Any questions on ARIA required or other state type elements? We're kind of coming full circle from ARIA selected that I showed you with the tabs to ARIA required. Or I guess
we've got 2 questions.
State. 2 questions, okay.
2 questions. The first is from Bo. When using ARIA required in form field and using JAWS screen reader and the user have not done any input, the screen reader reads erroneous input. Is this a known phenomena / problem?
Yeah, that's doing a validation check. It's not actually the ARIA tag. I mean, if they leave it blank, the ARIA is not going to affect that. That would be done through coding of a validation. There is, I think, an ARIA-valid, and it doesn't. If you type the wrong type of characters or whatever you've specified, you can get an error. But as you just saw in this example,
submit button. Email : editor required. Name : editor required. Email : editor required. Name : editor required.
It's not giving me anything in terms of invalid input. But I have experienced, what you're talking about, and you can write a rule that changes the ARIA-valid to true or false, so that they get the feedback. Oftentimes there'll be a pop-up message. You didn't, incorrect format or whatever, or you can't leave this field blank. And so when that pops up for the visual user, oftentimes people, if they're using ARIA valid, will say ARIA valid is false. So it does take some scripting in the background, but the ARIA required attribute itself will not produce that invalid input message.
Similar question involving NVDA. When using ARIA controls and NVDA screen reader, there is no instructions how to get into the controlled area. Should one recommend ARIA controls?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. I mean, NVDA will read ARIA attributes, but this is a good question to lead into the when part of the presentation. There are going to be people using older browsers or one browser versus another. As I said, Firefox will read some ARIA controls better than IE. IE will read some better than Firefox, Google, Chrome, et cetera, keeping up on screen readers. So are they using NVDA? Are they using JAWS? Are they using Dolphin products? Are they using narrator or voiceover? There's a lot of variables. The general rule is to go with the HTML5. So create elements using good semantic markup that will be interpreted correctly by fairly modern browsers. If you can't get the information conveyed using basic HTML, then use the ARIA. So if there is a version of NVDA that for some reason isn't, getting, I don't know, role equals article, but you've actually used a semantic article tag, most likely it's going to still report that as an article region. ARIA's been around, let's see, 4 years now. Most of the screen readers handle it fairly well. Sometimes, like in JAWS, there's certain ARIA settings that get turned off. The default status, I'm finding that out with installing JAWS on this new machine. But try to go with good semantics, good clean markup, and then add ARIA. If there's a particular screen reader or screen reader browser combination that can't access the information, there are plenty more that do. So you don't want to not do it because there's a few who can't. You want to do it because there will be others who can take advantage of that information. Hopefully that answers. But I don't use NVDA too often, but I haven't had any issues. And again, it'll depend on whether you're using NVDA with IE or Chrome or Firefox and which version of Firefox. It's quite a soup.
So Bo did clarify a little bit. He said when using JAWS and using ARIA controls, you get an instruction how to get into the controlled area, some combination of keys. But you do not get this information within NVDA, and it is not just the use of arrow keys.
Yeah, so when I hit a tab and it says use whatever the keystroke is.
Edit. Virtual PC. ARIA : Roll tab. ARIA dash required tab selected. Use JAWS key plus Alt plus M to move the controlled element.
JAWS key, which is the insert key on the numpad, plus the Alt key plus M. The keystrokes, these are things that JAWS has built in as a description, and this is being reported because I've included the ARIA-controls attribute, which links to the tab panel. Now, you can put role equals tab panel on your tab panel and visually identify it. I find that annoying as a screen reader user. I just want to get the information. Well, what I do instead, so here I have
ARIA dash required tab selected.
ARIA required tab selected. Well, if I did the Alt Insert M, where it would take me is to the heading inside my tab panel. Instead, what I did is make the heading tabbable. So when I tab from this tab,
ARIA dash required.
I'm
Heading level 3 ARIA dash required.
on the level 3 heading. So I just do less than H3 tab index equals 0 greater than. So that becomes a tabbable element. So now, if you're a JAWS user, you can use Alt Insert M if your dexterities and hands are large enough to do that. If NVA is not reporting or offering a keystroke of that nature, pressing tab is still going to take you directly to the information. So again, it's a benefit for those who can take advantage of it, putting in a pretty simple alternative for those who can't. Okay.
Do you want to finish out the when section, or should we just continue with questions?
We can continue questions. Yeah, I think when is, use HTML, good semantic markup, and use ARIA for widgets, dynamic content to differentiate regions, things of that nature. Pretty basic. So yeah, let's finish out. We've got about 9 minutes left. If we'll take any other additional questions. That was redundant.
Great. I'm gonna start with what's freshest, and then if we have time, I'll jump back to Bo's question about roles. So Bo's next question is, if a link is repeated multiple times by the screen reader, which ARIA role attribute do I use to correct it?
Repeated multiple times by the screen reader. Well, in order for that to happen, the link would have to occur multiple times on the page. It won't simply repeat a link. There isn't an ARIA attribute to change that. What often happens, what you may be referring to, often the case there will be an image
ARIA dash required heading level.
An image or an icon followed by a visible text, label, description, whatever. And people will code both the image and the text link as separate links. So mouse users generally will click on the icon. Screen reader users will generally click on the text link. Well, unfortunately, when you're tabbing as a screen reader, I hit tab, I land on the image, which is a link, and it has the alt text link X. Then I hit tab again and end up on the text label, which says link X. So I really have two links. The solution for that is to create one link, include both the image and the text, and then hide the image from the screen reader using an empty alt attribute, alt equals quote, quote. So now when the screen reader tabs to that link, it will simply read the text value. However, the image is included in the anchor, so mouse users can still click the icon. But there isn't an ARIA solution to that. It's how the links are coded.
So Bo clarified and said, is there a quick fix for adjusting, quote unquote, a mess in the code that forces the screen reader to read twice? Laura then commented and said ARIA-hidden.
You can use ARIA hidden to completely, prevent a screen reader from seeing anything. Are Are you talking about multiple links, or, I mean, if I arrow down a page, often I'll hear the label for the link along, and then when I get to the control, it's repeated because of the use of ARIA labeled by. So I could hide that initial visible label from the screen reader, and it will still be read when I tab to the actual control. But yeah, there shouldn't be multiple links to the same resource, at least not adjacent to one another. I mean, without an example, I'm not. So I have read and agree to the terms above appears as a visual label. So when I'm arrowing down the screen, I hear that. And then I get to the checkbox, which has that text programmatically associated with it. And so I hear the same thing read a second time. So you could, on the initial text, you could use, you could probably use an ARIA hidden so that it's not read except when the person encounters the actual control.
So Bo followed up again. No, it is only one link, and some scripting has made the screen reader to read the link twice. Laura commented, oh, you don't want ARIA hidden for that then. The link wouldn't be read at all if there's only one link. I think at this point, we should probably have an example. So Bo, if maybe you want to reach out to Phil after the webinar and show him exactly what you're working with, maybe he can help you. And then if we have a nice clean answer, we can share that on the handout page for the webinar after the fact. I just want to, while we have about 3 minutes left, jump back to Bo's earlier question about roles, so we can touch on that one. Let me just find it in the chat. Okay, so Bo asks, I'm sorry, this is a question referring to the roles you talked about earlier. If you use HTML5 section/landmark elements, is it necessary to also use ARIA landmark roles, as now the HTML validators warns about redundant information?
Yeah, I said, yeah, it's, so less nav role equals navigation. So the ARIA role is redundant with the element, and the validators, last time I tried it, yeah, we're throwing a message about that. It won't hurt anything, but if you're using HTML5 semantic markup, you don't need to worry about the role element. The screen reader, the browser, it's going to interpret those regions. The only time you need to worry about adding ARIA markup to an HTML5 landmark region like main, nav, search, etc., is if there's more than one instance of it on the screen, like we talked about earlier with primary navigation region and section navigation region. And those would be ARIA label or ARIA labeled by. But it's not necessary to have role. Yeah, the HTML, semantic HTML5 tags like header, search, nav, main, footer, will, article, aside, they'll all be identified correctly by screen readers.
We've got 1 minute left, so if there's anyone on the phone who would like to ask a quick question, that's pound or hash button and 6. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, I don't see anyone unmuting. We do have another question coming in from Corey, but I think at this point we're out of time. Oh, Corey just commented, this has been a great webinar and very informative. Thank you. So as I said, we are out of time. Huge thank you to Phil. This was a super informative presentation, and I hope all of you got as much out of it as I did. And also a huge thank you to our captionist, especially for rolling with the couple of audio issues we had at the beginning. It was a great session. So Phil, I'm going to take control back of the screen and just put you on mute quickly to guard against some background noise, and then I'll bring you back right at the end. So thank you so much for everyone who has attended. We do have a feedback survey. It's a live link right here in Adobe Connect. So you can go ahead and click on it right here in Adobe. It'll take you right to the survey. Just make sure that you select this session to fill out the survey. It only takes a few minutes, and we really love to hear from you. It helps us plan our webinar series for the future, so please do that. If you've attended any of our other webinars this year but have not yet filled out the survey, you can complete it a second time. Just select the webinar that you'd like to review, and we'll see those responses. Also, if you've attended an archive of a webinar from this year, please go ahead and fill that out. For those of you not connected to Adobe Connect, we'll be sending that same information out in an email later, so definitely please do that if you're able. As I mentioned at the beginning, we do record these webinars and they're available in our archive. So that second link on this page is a link to our archived webinar library. You can select that right here, or you can visit our website under the Education tab, Archived Webinar Library, to check out all the webinars we've had since 2014. We do have 2 final webinars coming up in our 2018 webinar series. On Thursday, November 15th, we have Agile Accessibility in a Regulated Industry. And then on Thursday, December 13th, our final webinar of the 2018 series, Let's Not Ignore the People That Matter in Accessibility Testing. Those should both be really great sessions, and we hope to see you there. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Phil back, see if he has any last comments.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you, Phil. This was great. That does conclude our session.
Yep, well, thank
I'm
you.
going to pop you back on quickly. Sorry about that, Phil. Phil was just saying thank you to everyone. I think I cut you off with the mute a little bit. That does conclude our session. To exit Adobe Connect, you don't have to do anything special. Just close the window. If you're connected over the phone, all you have to do is hang up. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out that follow-up email with a link to the recording as well as a link to the feedback survey. Thanks, everyone.